Hi, my name is David Williams, and I am shooting this video today to meet performance indicator 212 for biblical interpretation and communication. It states that the student can critically assess the effectiveness of communication techniques in ministry. And I'm going to be doing that by analyzing and breaking down and identifying those communication techniques in a sermon by a pastor that I follow a lot. His name is Pastor Josh Howerton at Lake Point Church, and I'm going to be assessing a sermon that he preached that was week one of a 7-week series where he, in each of the weeks, broke down one of the letters to the 7 churches in the book of Revelation. And so I'll be doing week one of that series where he talked about the letter to the Ephesians and chapter 2 of Revelations. And I'm really going to focus on his communication techniques. And so this is not, I'm not critically assessing or summarizing the sermon. I'm actually critically assessing just the communication techniques and the effectiveness of those as he was conveying the biblical truth in this sermon. And so just starting with overall, it would be the biblical preaching technique of exposition, which really dominates most of Pastor Josh's message and most of his messages. And he does that in several ways. One of the main ways that he does that is in this particular sermon, he actually preaches verse by verse, and so it's not a proof texting, but a structured exposition. And really, exposition is the preaching of the discovery that has come from a process of exegesis to hermeneutics, and so he does that consistently throughout this message and throughout a lot of his messages. And he really does the work of interpretation first, and then he preaches what he has discovered. One example in the message that he does this in particular is at one point in the message he is referencing the second verse of the chapter where it talks about God is affirming the church for not having tolerance. And he really does his due diligence of breaking down the original word there that we're translating in our English translations to tolerance. And he really allows Scripture to interpret Scripture here, because he talks about how every other time that word is used in the biblical text anywhere throughout the New Testament, and even in a couple times in the Old Testament, the Hebrew equivalent of that word, every time it's mentioned, God is rebuking or rejecting someone who's having tolerance. And then in this particular case, he is actually affirming them for not having that tolerance. And so he really does a good job of doing that exegesis and then allowing it to lead to the hermeneutics of how we can apply that, and the fact that tolerance is oftentimes misconstrued or misinterpreted as being loving, and actually he makes the argument that it's more loving to not tolerate things that are unbiblical or things that are going to drive people astray. And so that's one example of how he takes us on the journey through exposition of showing us the exegesis and then the hermeneutics. He does this also through another communication technique, which is storytelling and historical narrative. And he does this a good bit throughout the message. He in the very beginning of the message, there's a video of him actually in modern day Turkey, standing in front of some ruins of what would have been ancient Ephesus, and in that video he actually breaks down the historical context of ancient Ephesus and talks a lot about the city and the reality. And then in the message he goes back to some of that history that he laid out, and as he's talking about verse 3, where God is affirming them for standing tall in the midst of persecution. He does a great job of talking about the the secret Christian marks that are seen even today in the ruins. And the reason for that was because the Christians of the time had to start hiding because of the persecution that they were facing. And then he really breaks down kind of the history that led to that, how the city was rooted in worship to Artemis, and even the economy was very much rooted in the manufacturing of those idols for that. And as there was a revival happening, a Christian revival happening, and people were giving their lives to the Lord, that economy started to take a hit because less people were buying those idols. And so the metal workers, which was a large portion of the economy, a major player in the economy, started to rally opposition towards the Christians, and so they started to face a lot of persecution. And so that was how he took us through the exegesis of the context, of the historical context, through storytelling and historical narrative. And then he bridges into the hermeneutics, and he starts to list off people in modern day who may be facing or experiencing persecution or pressure to waver on their values. And he reminds us that still the biblical truth that still matters for us today that we see here is that God affirms those who stand tall in the midst of persecution. And this storytelling approach really helps the audience to emotionally and cognitively locate the text in real history, rather than just abstract theology. And so another technique that he uses that I want to point out is that he uses visual aids a good bit. And he engages the audience with this, starting with what I've already mentioned, where he had that video of himself in Turkey in front of the ruins. When he started to talk about the historical narrative that I already mentioned about the Christian secret symbols, he showed images of that are seen today in the ruins. And then on top of that, throughout the message, he is consistently putting his points on the screen and putting his verses on the screen so that the audience can follow him with those visual aids. And then he even mentions that in this series, he had gone on a journey to where all of these 7 churches were, and that video that he started the message with, he has one of those for each one of the messages of the 7 messages in the series, which I thought was really, really cool. And one of the things that he does very well at is delivering illustrations that matter. And this is a big part of his just tone and how he engages the audience. I mean, he had one moment where he was really laying out the 2 errors that maybe we have in modern day, where some of us think maybe too highly of the church, but then many of us maybe think too lowly of the church. And he has a great illustration where he talks about how if someone were to come to him and tell him, "Pastor Josh, I love you, but I hate your wife," and he uses that as an illustration for maybe how God would respond to someone saying that they love him and follow him, but hate the church. And so really, Pastor Josh has a history of having a pastoral tone, but by not sugarcoating the truth. And he's very he very much roots his messages and the way that he preaches in the truth. And so the one thing that I want to point out that isn't necessarily a critique of Pastor Josh, but it is an acknowledgement that the way that he preaches and the way that he delivers would have to be different in different contexts. So if this were going to be for youth ministry, the exposition would probably need to be more simplified. If this was going to be in like a small group setting, it would need to be more of a dialogue versus a monologue, obviously. And then if it was for online communications, maybe the visuals even more critical or more crucial to drive the point home. Overall, I think that Pastor Josh does a great job of of making sure that he has biblical exposition throughout his entire message, and then he very much bounces around using storytelling, visual aid, and appropriate tones as he preaches every week. Thank you.